India is definitely one of the most developed nations. But on the other side, India has been on the list of the top polluted countries in the world. India will again fall short in terms of agricultural production, which will result in a major poverty issue, again people dying due to hunger. That people have started understanding that managing the environment itself is the biggest development that you can ever talk about. Good morning and welcome to the first session in Unit 1, second semester BCom for Sustainable Development, where we are going to speak about the relationship between environment and development. Now, as we are making a progress in the field of civilization, it has been a major concern in the recent years. What are we really doing to take care of our environment? So in the recent years, there has been a growing concern about the degradation and pollution that has been caused to the environment. And why it has been caused? The answer is obvious, because we as human beings have forgotten to take care of the environment. Now, when we are talking about developed and developing countries, the only problem or the challenge that is being faced along is that in both these kind of countries, in both these kind of continents put together, we have been facing a constant problem where there is a conflict between the economic growth and that of the environment. This contrast is very, very clearly found today. Now, let's take India for an example here. India is a developing country. Now let me change myself. Why? Because India is now a developed country. In every hemisphere, in every single activity that we are getting into, India is definitely one of the most developed nations. But on the other side, India has been on the list of the top polluted countries in the world. The air quality has come down. There has been a soil degradation, water contamination. The lifestyle of people have got drastically changed. So the conflict between the economic growth and that of the environment is clear, it's visible today. That's why we are looking into this topic of sustainable development, where we want to understand on a long-term perspective how to grow with the environment in place. We cannot avoid environment. We cannot say that we can give up on environment and concentrate only on growth. No, we want a situation where India becomes a fast-growing nation by becoming a cleaner and greener nation together. Moving forward, the developing countries are making a strenuous effort in balancing their need for the rapid growth and development with the environmental concerns which are always there. Now, you look at the small countries around India, Vietnam, or you talk about Hong Kong, you talk about Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, Burma. All these countries are equally good. They are capable of becoming most powerful nations in the coming years, no doubt about it. Each one of these countries have their own specialities, have their unique set of deliveries kept in place. But the concern that is coming into the minds of people today is that how is that they are going to keep their environment clean and green? There is always a huge doubt in the minds of people that will we be able to sustain our livelihoods with the current lifestyle? With the ever-growing demand for oil and energy, is the nation ready to satisfy the needs of people? Or is it that we want to change ourselves to electric and say that we don't want oil and petroleum anymore? Or is it that are we trying to go further, trying to change the agriculture from that of the fertilizer based to an organic based agriculture? What is that we are trying to reach in a given period of time? That's where the sustainable energy, the sustainable development factors are coming into it. So we are constantly working on a development strategy which is primarily trying to address the needs of the environment today. Now, most of you might be knowing about the social campaign which is going on talking about Save the Soil. Now, there's got nothing to to be talking about in terms of marketing of it, but what I'm trying to bring in, the emphasize here is that somewhere down the lane, there are people who are showing lot of concerns in terms of soil, in terms of the nature. That is, it might be water, it might be about the forest, it might be about the land, but then people have now become aware. They want to go forward, they want to protect the environment where they live. So this is the right time for India to gear up, to understand that growth is not possible without bringing in a clean and green environment. So that's where we need a sustainable development strategy that can take us forward and create a better living lifestyle for all of us. Now, moving further, the pollution and environment factors altogether. The concern over environment issue arises because it is thought that population may increase to a level where needs cannot be adequately taken care. Now, I would like to bring in this point very clearly here. At any given instance, at any given point of time, please understand the factor that population is the biggest concern in our country. As the population level keeps on rising, the needs and wants of people will also start going up, saturate, which we will not be able to satisfy in the given time period. At some point of time, we would start thinking that, yes, this growing population is going to be a never-ending problem for us. So what we need to do here is that somewhere down the lane, we have to bring in a check into this particular system. And due to this increasing population, there has always been a problem in our system. Now, moving forward, let's try to talk about the factor called as population and environment altogether. Now, increase in population causes over exploitation of natural resources like forests, water, fisheries, minerals, at a very, very greater rate. It's, the rate at which we are talking is humongous. It just cannot be imagined at all. Now, what is our biggest concern is that you are trying to put in a thrust, a pressure over the environment. There was a time in India where we could proudly say that more than 50% of India was covered by greenery, which means it was more about the abundance in terms of forest wealth. But today, less than 20% of India's landscape is around in terms of the forest scar. The remaining every single place is being converted for urban or for rural living standards altogether, which means slowly we are depleting the nature. And the more we go towards the purpose of depleting the nature, it is going to affect our own lifestyle. It's going to come back and tell us that we will not be able to survive in this nation, in this Mother Earth forever. So that's why I always say that the growing population is definitely a concern for a country like India, China, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia, almost every single country which is believing that the population can be used as a resource of growth. Definitely not. Why? Because population concern is definitely a major issue towards environment. Followed by which the pressure on land compels us to cultivate arable land intensively by using chemical inputs such as fertilizers. Now, recently there was a news in the papers as well as on the TV channel saying that the wheat production in the northern parts of India, especially when we are talking about Punjab, Haryana, Madhya Pradesh, in all those zones, have come down drastically. The reason being the climatic factors and also the soil degradation that we have been talking about. Now, what is happening is that just to satisfy the hunger of billions of people in India, hundreds of acres of land have to be cultivated and they are being done using the chemical fertilizers, which means to say that the pressure on soil, the pressure on land in terms of cultivation is going up very high. And this is dangerous. Why? Because it will tend to cause a very harmful effect on the soil. Plus, it will also go to such an extent that the land will lose its fertility very soon. If this is going to be the case in the coming years, automatically what is going to happen here is that India will again fall short in terms of agricultural production, which will result in a major poverty issue, again, people dying due to hunger. So now you can see the impact of population on the environment. This is very, very important. This is not just a subject which we are just going to study for marks or study for a degree purpose, but this is our lifestyle. So I always tell, while taking the classes of sustainable environment, I always want to re-emphasize on this point that this is our livelihood. This is our standard of living. This is how we need to protect ourselves. We need to come up with a plan so that we are able to help people to survive, to come back and live a healthy lifestyle. Followed by, according to Professor M.S. Swaminathan, the great scientist who was a part of the Green Revolution, the capacity to support the existing human and animal population has exceeded in many parts of the world, and if the population growth is not checked, this will endanger in terms of attainment of the food. So let's try to understand that statement very, very clearly. Now, there is something called as a capacity, as a maximum benchmark, what I would like to talk about. But if you're going to exceed that benchmark, if you're going to exceed that capacity levels, automatically it is going to raise the alarm, and this is going to go to a situation where people will not be able to be supported at any point of time. And that's what is going to happen now, and that's what has been happening also in many parts of India. Now, we are seeing that several parts of India is completely gone beyond the depletion stage, and now we are seeing that people are not able to sustain, they're not able to live a normal life. They are migrating from one point to another point because they want to survive, which means to say that slowly inside our country, we are facing an internal shortage of resources, of agricultural produce. The quality of life standards are coming down, and there is a severe pressure and threat over the environment, followed by which we are seeing that there's a rapidly increasing population in developing countries, which will lead to the overpopulation or a population explosion altogether. Now, what is the reason behind it? Why do we think that population explosion is happening only in developing countries? The reason is quite simple: because of the employment opportunities. The reason is that people today think that developing countries are providing better platform for sustainability, and developing countries are providing better infrastructure and facilities for living condition. But this being on one side, the other side is that these cities are not able to take the pressure. They're not able to take the load. Now, we are seeing is that there has been a severe threat to the security, to the livelihoods, and people are also feeling about this factor that we might not be able to continue to lead a life like this. On the other side, you see that when we are moving towards the coastal area, the depletion of sea, that is, we are trying to occupy as much of land possible, and we have gone far enough in the exploration of sea that slowly the water levels are receding back, which means that's also going to sign something bad to us in terms of expanding our land towards into the sea. Now, the other thing, poverty in developing countries is also said to be responsible for the environmental degradation, because poor people rely on the natural resources more than the rich. Now, this is a very, very important point. Now, when you look into the factors of poverty, though people might say that poverty is all about the concerning factors of money, that's the living standard, the luxury and the comfort factors. But let me tell you, poverty is not just about the money. It is not just about talking about the income factors. Poverty is more about the standard of living. For many countries, the problem today is that the standard of living is continuously degrading. The reason is we have been relying on the natural resources, and the depletion of natural resources make the lives even more harder. So that's where we see that poverty is growing in developing countries. This is another sign that our environment is under severe threat, followed by the survival of rural poor are forced to cut the forest for timber, fuel, as well as for grazing of animals on pasture land. And this is more than the reproductive capacity of the natural resources. It is a very, very easy factor today that I just take an axe and cut down the tree in the forest for my survival. I will give the leaves to my cattle, to my poultry, so that they are happy, they get the food. But What step did I take personally to rebuild that tree, to plant another tree somewhere? Now, what is happening is that we are happily cutting down the resources that has been given to us by nature. On the other side, we are forgetting to refill that nature back. Have we taken any steps to rebuild it? To bring back that same capacity, to bring back the same level of quality of life standards that we are looking into? That's definitely not done by us. We just believe that nature will cure itself, but that's not the truth. The truth is that you need to take care of the nature, then only the nature will be able to take care of you. So this is the right time where we have to think that how to protect our natural resources. If we just go on a depletion mode, we are not going to survive at any cost. Followed by the poverty and environment, where we are talking about where the cultivatable land becomes short of relatively to the population. The poor are forced to make their subsistence by cultivating fragile land on the hills and the mountains, resulting in soil erosion on a large scale. It is such an environment that poverty becomes a vicious cycle altogether. Just look into it. Why? Because I would like to bring in these words here is that we are actually a part of a vicious cycle which is never ending in nature. We are actually getting into a sector, into a phenomenon where we are not able to decipher the fact that we are the creators, we are the destroyers, and we are the people who are actually responsible for the earth sinking down. So this is the right time where we have to understand if poverty will continue to exist, poverty will continue to develop in our nation, it's because of us. So poverty leads to the land degradation, and degradation accelerates the process of impoverishment because the poor are not able to get what they want. So at one point of time, when people ask this question in economics, why is the income inequality still relevant to our country? Why is that the word inequality even still exists in such a developed country like India? The reason is quite common. Why? Because the word poverty still exists. There is still a huge divide among the poor and rich. The natural resources, the accessibility to any resource is still a very big question mark to many of the people in our country. Moving forward, now, poverty and environment, besides the cultivatable land becomes short relative to population, the poor are forced to make their subsistence by cultivating the fragile land which is available on the hills and mountains, resulting in soil erosion. And when we talk about the hill stations in India, though they are popular tourist destinations, like when we talk about Ooty or when we talk about Shimla or when we talk about Dehradun, Manali, any of these kind of places, people remember them only for the fancy destination tours. They don't understand the problem that is being undergone, challenges that is being taken up by the people living in that area. The reason is that those people are forced to take up agriculture on a very, very fragile land which is not supported by any factors of nature, and thereby it results into soil erosion, again pushing the people back into poverty. Now, this is one situation which I would like to present today. Why? Because this is the environment which you and me are experiencing today, where we are circling back into the same story and coming back and telling that India is a poor country. Yes, India will become a poor country if we continue to degrade our environment. So at any given point of time, please understand poverty is a man-made situation. Poverty is not created by nature. Poverty is not created by any invisible force. Poverty is created by you and me. So if you don't go back, and save the earth, if you don't go back and save the environmental forces, that is your natural resources that are being given to you, you are going to land up in poverty, and definitely more and more poor people are bound to exist on this earth. Now, moving further, thus as mentioned about the use of natural resources by the poor, this is one of the major reasons why you see that poverty continues to operate. It is important to note that the poorest in our society will suffer the most if we use our resources unsustainably in the environment. Very, very important. And their livelihood will directly depend upon the water, land, sea, and forest. So this is very, very important for us. Why? Because at any given point of time, as we move forward, we have to keep in mind depletion in any kind of format will definitely harm their lifestyle. So it is not just about building those great bridges, metros, trains, or great infrastructure facilities like the National Express highways and other things. But then we have a greater responsibility than that, going back and saving the water, land, and other resources as far as possible. The next thing, however, it is important to note that it's often the poor who suffer the most from the consequences of pollution and environment. Unlike the rich, the poor cannot afford to protect themselves from contaminated waters in the city and more likely to spend much more of their time on streets breathing the polluted air altogether. Now, this is a very big challenge that I'm always trying to address in terms of sustainable development and environmental economics. The difference between rich and poor comes from the word called as affordability. Can you afford something? That makes a clear distinction between you and the person who cannot afford it. Now, when you go back to the cities, you see the tall skyscrapers, you see nice metro trains, you see polished railway stations, you see posh malls and everything, but these are only meant for the people who can afford that luxury. What about a common man? What about a poor man who's living on the streets? What about the person who still struggles to have one square meal? Now, there comes the question of sustainable development. What have we done to increase the livelihood of that person? What have we done for the benefit of poor people in India? Nothing. We have been trying to tell the people of India the story of development, but that story of development is very painful. Why? Because we never took care about our environment. Development and environment are two words which have to be taken in the same stand. You cannot take development on a higher stand and let the environment to degrade. If that is going to be the scenario, if that is going to be the option that you're going to take, then you've already taken the choice of total destruction. That's exactly what has been happening here. Many of the poor people are not even able to have an access to clean drinking water, to have a quality air for breathing, or to have a good quality food for their living. The reason for all these things is that the rich can afford, they have the money to afford. The poor do not even have that affordability factor. So this is where poverty is again getting up in a larger scale in India, followed by the business and the natural environment. The decline and degradation of natural environment of an economy and its impact on the people, it's a very big thing. How business environments are concerned with this environmental issue, that's what we're going to see here. Now, they are connected to the natural environment in two ways. The first thing is that they require natural resources such as land, energy resources, wood, water for their production work. Definitely yes. So they need some natural resources. They need some potential resources for their development, for their growth altogether. In the present state of technological development, modern industries do not depend on natural resources to a great extent. But then in the early stages of the 19th century, that's the industrial development era, they were. Today what is happening is that the development of industries is more onto the service side. They are more onto the technology side. So the dependency is more towards on the semiconductors, the batteries, and the electric side that's going on to the factor. So the dependency is more towards the technological advancement. It is not going back to the natural resources. But nevertheless, on the other hand, if you see that the production industry, when I talk about an automobile, when I talk about a typical brick and mortar company which is involved in production, they are still involved in the dependency of environment, and they are also primarily the reason for degradation and pollution of environment. So what is happening today is that the vehicular traffic in urban areas is one of the major reasons for greater pollution of air and water, which causes heavy damage to the health of the people, which represents the social cost imposed on the society. So this is something very, very interesting for us to just dwell for a minute. Every year in India, we get about some 10 to 12 different models of car, or probably another 15 to 20 different models of bike that land up in India. And India being an ever-growing country which is thirsty in terms of acquiring new machines, new cars, the roads are flooded with these mean machines. The roads are completely clogged by those heavy vehicles. What is the result of this? The result of this is that you see a polluted city, you see a very, very low quality air which has been taken as a breathing solution for so many people. So many people are not even able to breathe properly. And you see a city which is again having the same story called as traffic jam. Why is this happening is that we are only talking about production. We are not talking about having the resources that can fit in to manage that volume of production. One side, when you talk about Bangalore as a city, the Silicon Valley of India, the challenge in Bangalore is that the rate at which the city is trying to expand itself, the rate at which the city is growing is not the same rate at which you have the natural resources to accommodate it. So what you're trying to do is that you're trying to destroy the city and again rebuild it, which is actually resulting in the destruction of the natural environment. Followed by, because of these adverse effects, the industries which pollute air and water need to be regulated. Very, very important. Prevent them from causing heavy damage to the health of the people. Now, most of us know about the unfortunate Bhopal gas tragedy, which claimed hundreds and thousands of people's life. And that was one of the prime example in the year 1984 when it took place, 84-85. That was a directive example of how you can be creating such a destructive factor to the environment, how you can literally end the lives of innocent people by just following those unethical methods altogether. Followed by, now in India, we see that setting up of big industrial projects, company both in private and public sectors are required to get clearance from the Ministry of Environment and Forest, which has been given as a condition that they have to put in place. Now, one side we have created barricades, we have created checkpoints where industries have to get the clearance. They have to get a very, very clear notice saying that, yes, you are eligible to set up the industry in that given sector. But then that setup, that checkpoint is not enough. Why? Because this is something which is now getting uncontrollable. India trying to become the capital of startups. What we are seeing in India today is that there is a lot of industries which are starting up in India at a very rapid pace. You see that India is now having hundreds and thousands of industries opened up every year. So now the question of space, the question of utilization of resources, and the question of survival of the people starts emerging into the minds. So at some point of time, India needs to bring in a solution as soon as possible where we are able to sustain ourselves to the growth. Followed by the business and natural environment that we are talking about. We also see that the clearance that is being given have their impact on the natural environment as we are talking about, and to ensure a green economy, there has been a need which has been felt in India to integrate that entire environmental concerns into the mainstream. Now, there are many companies in India today, they have taken the objective, rather I would say that they have gone on the vision of creating a greener company. They want to create a company which is focused purely towards environmental solutions rather than looking into the normal manufacturing or services-based industry, which means today the concern has gone up to that extent that people have started understanding that managing the environment itself is the biggest development that you can ever talk about. Followed by concrete guidelines are being framed on how to go ahead with the projects both in private and public sector, land acquisitions, and then when we are talking about the environmental challenges that we are facing in projects, one of the biggest things that we are facing in today, the policy of the government is not to have development at high cost of the environment, and at the same time the policy is also trying to seek a balance between the two. So one side, when the government makes an announcement saying that India India is becoming the startup capital of the world. India is trying to make a progress in terms of development, in terms of industries and other sector. The cost of this development is definitely falling on the environment. So we want to see that at some point of time that the projects versus that of progress. I use this word very, very clearly here. Project versus progress. Why? Because one side when we are talking about project, the other side we also need to understand the progress towards the environment that we have to make so that the policy is able to strike a balance clearly. Followed by this word called as green management, which is coming up in a very, very big way in India. Most of the top managements and the managers should contain a factor in their mind where they are concerned about the environmental protection at any given point of time by defining the environmental politics of the organization. Very, very important. And organization should be aware of the social responsibility that we are talking about. They should train their personnel as environmental conscious people. So this is very, very important for each one of us to understand at this given point of time. Followed by, when I talk about this green management, it is more about gaining a competitive advantage, providing a continuity to the business, admit the factor that green management will provide an edge to growth and to contribute to the environment as fast as possible. Protect the environment, that is also a very important thing. Evaluate the business by using the criteria about environment. Precaution should always be taken in terms of understanding the environmental problems. Followed by building a socially responsible business. This is where we need to concentrate today. Why? Because building a business, everybody can do. There's no doubt about it because everybody has a vision, everybody has a thought process. They want to make money. Everything is good. But then, are you socially responsible when you are building a business? That's what comes into picture. So what we need to do is that we have to train the people about the environmental protection. Second thing, we have to enhance the responsibilities of the workers who work in production department, including the environment protection quality, to enable the workers with business that will take effect in environmental issues. So we have to sort of get back to the classroom, teach the workers what is the importance of environmental factors. The next thing is that to install a system and equipments that can provide solution to the problems about environment, to remove the obstacles which can be with the departments in the business. So all these things, as we are going about in the slide, what we are trying to understand is that how to educate that employee at any given point of time so that he understands the nature of work and comes into the factor of social responsibility. Now, the other thing is that to provide equipments about the environment protection. Also, environment protection should pay attention while determining the standards of the work to enable the workers to be proud that they are providing some benefit to the nature. Managers should also be a part of this story. Why? Because they cannot be something emphasizing or preaching something what they are not practicing. So managers should also be a part of the environmental protection plan and to apply a detailed education development plan through which they can train all the employees about the environmental growth and sustainability. With this, I come to the end of the session. I hope and believe that all the important factors that we have talked about in this session will be of great use to you both practically as well as from a theoretical standpoint. In the next session, we will be talking more about the nature and its concerns. But until then, stay tuned, stay blessed, and stay enlightened forever. Thank you once again for joining me today on this wonderful session.